Are you looking for a system to crush the king's gambit from the black side? Stay tuned. I'm going to show you guys how to use Lichess Opening Explorer with Stockfish to crush the king's gambit. Alright, so here we can see I have the Stockfish analysis up, and what I like to do is I open up the opening book, and then in the settings I like to pick a rating range wherever you think your opponents are going to fall. So here I'm showing 1600 to 2000, actually 2200, Blitz, Rapid, and Classical. So after e4, e5, f4 gets us to the king's gambit. I should also mention that I'm going to start a series called the Opening Lab. In the comments below, let me know if you want me to look at another opening and give some recommendations, and I'll put that on the schedule for an upcoming video. So someone asked in our ChessGoals Discord, what should I play against the king's gambit? This is my recommendation. This is called the Falkbeer Counter-Gambit. And what you're doing here is you're saying, okay, I'm going to put 2 pawns in the center and have both of my bishops ready to quickly develop. And white has 2 pawns in the center, but one of them is the f-pawn, which opens up this diagonal to the king and this diagonal to the king. And this c1 bishop is not ready to get into the game yet. So in terms of just the pawns, black has the advantage here. The only advantage white has in this position is that it's white to move. So now what we're going to do is look at the most popular move first in the database, and then we'll work our way back. So that's how I like to learn openings. Go down the most popular line, and then work back up the tree. E takes d5. Alright, so if we look at Stockfish, E takes f4 is minus 1/10, c6 is plus 1/10, and if we look at the stats, E takes f4 scores 49% for black. C6 does score pretty well, so that's something that I would consider. But let's look at E takes f4. That's my recommendation. Now what I like about this is normally in the king's gambit, this bishop comes to c4, pressures f7, well there's a pawn on d5. That's going to block this bishop on c4, making it difficult for white to attack f7. So now by far, knight f3, most popular move. And here I'm going to recommend knight to f6, getting developed. And we're threatening to win this important central pawn back. So now look at the most popular move for white. Pawn to c4. Securing this pawn on d5. And now there's a few different ways we can play this. If you want something simple, bishop to d6 is a pretty good way to go. But I think the strongest move is pawn to c6. So I'm going to make this the main line. Delete bishop d6. And the reason this is good is because if white takes, we take back with the knight. And we're using our pieces now to control the center. And that's the most popular move. So let's look at it. Knight takes c6. Alright. Now, imbalance-wise, we have the same number of pawns, but our knights are well placed and our bishops are both well placed. They're ready to develop quickly. White's potentially going to win a pawn, but in terms of the activity of their pieces, that bishop is still having trouble getting out and this bishop is running into a pawn. And then in terms of king safety, this king is already exposed with this f2 pawn gone. Our king is looking pretty safe. It's going to go over to g8. So I already like black's position quite a bit. Engine says minus 0.8. d4, most popular move. And now we have a couple good moves here, bishop g4 and bishop to b4 check. I'm going to recommend bishop to g4. I think that's the strongest. And now let's go with white's most popular move. Pawn to d5. And look at the stats here. Mistake by white. We're following the most popular moves. And we're already seeing a mistake by white. So the different ways we could punish it. Knight e5 or queen to b6. Bishop takes f3 is also showing. And I'm looking at the stats. Bishop takes f3 is scoring really well. Let's look at this. Bishop takes f3. Queen takes f3. Knight to d4, eyeing the c2 square, hitting the queen. There's no squares for this queen to check from. They're all covered. Knight, pawn, and knight. After queen takes f4, we can go win this rook. And we're looking at a 2.5 pawn advantage for black. All right, so now let's back up. Let's see, what else could white try? Maybe white should not take on c6. That gave us the advantage. So let's go with the strongest move for white. Pawn to d4. All right, now Stockfish likes bishop b4, c takes d, bishop g4, all good options. And if we look at the stats, bishop to b4 check scores pretty well. So let's look at this. Bishop b4 check. Knight c3, most common move. C takes d. Now the nice thing about this trio of pawns is if the d pawn trades for this pawn on c4, we're left with an isolated pawn for white on d4. So white's position looks very shaky here. And let's say white gets greedy, tries to grab that extra pawn. Here we can castle. And if we count the pawns, we've only lost 2 pawns. White has lost 2 pawns. But look at the imbalances again. Potential isolated pawn, more exposed king. We're up on development. We're already castled. So white needs to castle very quickly here. Bishop e2. And here we can take c4. And if the bishop takes again, that bishop moved twice in a position where white is trying to get the king to safety. So white's most popular move is to castle. And here Stockfish is lighting up. Minus 0.7, advantage for black. Takes, takes. And bishop to e6, holding this pawn. And there's a potential weakness on c3. And we're looking at a 0.3 or 0.4 edge for black. Knight e5. And here the computer likes queen c8 or knight to d5. And it looks like the idea here is put this here on d5, put this other knight on d7, start to develop that way. And black is holding a 0.4 or 0.5 edge. Another line that we could look at is pawn to d4 here. So if white doesn't try to hold this pawn, and Stockfish is saying that this is probably a mistake for white to not hold the pawn, and we can take d5 right away. Now c4 is most popular, and look at that, it's a mistake. So I do like these openings where the most popular move is a mistake. That means that in practice we have these chances to get really quick wins, especially as the time control gets faster. With bishop to b4 check. King to f2 is the top Stockfish move. But let's say bishop d2. Now we have knight e3. And if queen e2, creating a pin, we can castle out of this. Still threatening knight here, check. Bishop takes, we have rook e8. It's a 5.7 pawn advantage for white, according to the engine. Wow. White is up a piece, but in big trouble. If king d2, we have knight g4 hitting the queen, and our knight could maybe come to f2 if queen to d1 or queen to d3 is played. Queen has to move again. Take h1. So now we're up material, we're up the exchange, and the white king is really exposed with all these pieces on the board still. That's a 6.4 pawn advantage. So what else could white do? Say bishop c4. Knight takes d5, still looks good. And now here, let's try to get castled. We'll start with bishop e6. Can bishop e7 be played here? Yeah, it can. Okay, I like this. Bishop e7 and let's castle. So now the number of pawns, we're up 1 pawn. White's missing e and f. We're only missing the d pawn. The e pawn moved here. So white has to figure out still how to get the pawn back, and this is probably the most straightforward. But this position looks pretty solid for black. We have the bishop pair and the isolated queen pawn to play against. I think I would be more comfortable playing black here, but dynamically the position is balanced. White has some pretty quick development. So one other thought I had was kind of going back here. What if white plays something besides e takes d? So let's say knight f3, hoping that we move this pawn and maybe they can still get their bishop to c4 in. I think we still go e takes f. Allow this if white wants it, and if they don't want it, now we can play g5, and we're getting into like a traditional King's Gambit accepted, except we got this d pawn up very easily. This is already a 2.7 edge for black. So let's say d4. We can play g4. And again, like we talked about, there's no bishop c4 hitting the f7 pawn. That's the important point. And I think that takes away most of the fun for a King's Gambit player. So we're taking the King's Gambit, an aggressive opening for white. And we're giving you this counter gambit, the Falkbeer Counter-Gambit with d5. That gets really quick development, and in a lot of these lines, white doesn't have the fun of attacking the pawn on f7. So I think the game is kind of in our court. If you know this well, if you're an e5 player on move 1, have this ready to go. And you can explore these lines on your own. Obviously, this video is only 11 or 12 minutes. Explore these lines on your own, but get really good at playing them. And when you see King's Gambit, hopefully the game is in your court and it's your opponent that's really trying not to make a mistake. So let me know in the comments, what opening do you want to see next? Do you like this opening lab format where I go through, kind of show you guys, teach you the tools to build your own repertoire and sprinkle in some of my own recommendations? Let me know what you think of this format. Because one of the things I like to do with ChessGoals is teach the ChessGoals members how to improve chess on their own, how to create their own study plan, improve from their own weaknesses, or build your own opening repertoire, or take one of our opening courses and alter it for your own needs, like switch up some lines, add some different lines, etc. So I hope you guys like this video. Please give it a like. Please subscribe if you're not a subscriber. I'll be looking forward to your comments on the next openings to go through, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching, everyone.